Welcome back to the PFC Podcast. The views and opinions you are about to hear are the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of anyone else. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome back to the PFC Podcast. This is Dennis, and this episode was recorded with the sponsorship and support of the Special Operations Medical Association. Thank you guys very much, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Good. My name is Victor. I'm a former Ranger medic, and today I'll be sharing with you my lessons learned from a mass casualty event that occurred while serving in Burma. I have no financial disclosures. While on a humanitarian mission to provide medical support to those who lack access, we were requested to provide medical support for a combat operation that would result in 52 wounded and 18 who lost their lives. As part of a relief element, our team had to rapidly adapt to severe resource limitations, prolonged evacuation timelines, and an enemy that controlled both the air and the ground. I will be using this event as an example as a future scenario and obstacles that our force may face in future conflicts. I'll walk you through the situation that I faced, my decision-making process, execution, and outcomes. I'll be highlighting the key differences that I've observed between my time in the 75th Ranger Regiment during the global war on terrorism and transferring over to provide medical support in a denied hostile environment. I hope that this presentation will give the community considerations in preparations for future conflicts. Burma, also known as Myanmar, has been at armed conflict since World War II. Historically, this fighting has been fragmented, with separate ethnic minority groups waging their separate battles against the central government for autonomy. In early 2021, the military conducted a coup and immediately launched air and ground operations against the civilian population. Meanwhile, civil protests in the main cities was met with lethal force. For the first time in history, the ethnic minority groups and the ethnic Burmans would unite to fight the Burmese dictatorship. Currently, over 3.5 million civilians have fled from their homes and are hiding in fear in the jungles and mountains throughout Burma. Circled on this map is the area of operations that our team will be providing humanitarian support. What you're about to see is a time lapse from the beginning of the revolution to December of 2024. Red depicts ground engagements, while blue depicts the enemy's use of aircraft and drones. The Burma military currently controls key infrastructure, giving them a platform to conduct targeted attacks against the civilian population, with widespread reports of killings, abductions, and sexual violence. They are currently receiving support in the form of equipment and training from countries such as Russia and China. This video shares a glimpse into the reality that the innocent are currently experiencing. The revolutionary forces can be best described as two groups with very different backgrounds. First, we have our historical guerrilla fighters who have been fighting since World War II. These are the groups who fought alongside the Allied forces against the Japanese. Next, we have those who joined the revolution after the coup. This would bring to the revolution ethnic minority groups who have historically submitted to the central government's oppression. Additionally, it would bring to the revolution the ethnic Burmans who have lived under the central government and rejected the junta's brutal ruling. This would bring to the revolution medical providers and also military personnel from Burma's military. The Free Burma Rangers is a humanitarian, Christian-led organization that was founded in 1997 by former Ranger and SF officer David Eubank. Inside of Burma, the organization is composed of individuals from all ethnic groups and religious backgrounds with a common calling to serve the oppressed. Upon graduation of FBR's training, these individuals will earn the title of Ranger, where they would deploy to multiple conflict zones to provide humanitarian aid to the innocent. My first stop in Burma was at FBR's training camp. On arrival, the Rangers had just completed their courses and were preparing to deploy to multiple conflict zones in 4 days. I would be joining over 100 of them into Karenni State's conflict zone. With the 4 days in mind, in order to maximize preparation, we decided to train the Rangers solely on care under fire. FBR does not buy weapons and ammunition with donor money, and the limited supplies are donated by the resistance. Our mission set is to not get in the fight, but to provide care to those in need. With this in mind, I understood that gaining fire superiority would be extremely limited against ground elements and completely impossible against the enemy's air assets. So we would focus on ensuring the Rangers can identify, cover, and concealment and maneuver safely in the battle space in order to retrieve casualties. In regards to medical skills, we focus solely on achieving hemorrhage control. The majority of tourniquets available to us are Chinese-made tourniquets, many of them snapping during training. That's when I would introduce and implement the use of proximal pressure as a means to buy time before a device can be placed to achieve hemorrhage control. The Rangers carry triangle bandages and sticks on their kit in order to place improvised tourniquets. We would train in buddy teams for one Ranger to apply proximal pressure while the other Ranger applies the improvised tourniquet. Additionally, we trained various casualty extraction techniques based on various tactical situations. We started with isolated skills and ended with full scenario-based exercises. After the 4 days of training, we would begin our insertion into Karenni State's conflict zone. On our second day inside of Karenni, we were requested by the Revolution Force to provide medical support for an upcoming operation. They would be conducting a simultaneous raid on 2 Burma Army camps that were responsible for daily indirect fires and calling airstrikes onto the civilian population. They would be assaulting with a force of approximately 300 fighters in the next 36 hours. Because they had no medical support and the potential of civilian casualties, our team would separate our elements in order to provide point of injury care, manage casualty collection points, and initial surgical stabilization prior to evacuation to the nearest jungle hospital that was approximately 8 hours away. Due to our time constraints, I was not able to conduct a hospital survey prior to this operation. This is imagery above the 2 Burma Army camps. To the west of the river, that outpost we will refer to as Target 1. To the east of the river, we will refer to that camp as Target 2. Each camp consisted of approximately 40 to 50 soldiers and had the capabilities of firing 60, 81, and 120 millimeter mortars, in addition to calling for air support. To support this operation, we would establish 2 casual collection points, CCP Eagle and CCP Falcon. CCP Eagle was managed by myself, a small foreign volunteer team, and other junior ethnic ranger medics. CCP Falcon would be managed by a senior ethnic ranger medic and other experienced rangers. Additionally, we would establish 2 rescue teams. Each rescue team was consisted of about 20 rangers, all of whom just completed our 4 days of care under fire training. Their instructions were to provide immediate hemorrhage control and retrieve casualties back to their respective CCPs. Next, we would establish aid and litter teams. One aid and litter team would move casualties from CCP Falcon to CCP Eagle for further care, and the other aid and litter team would move casualties from CCP Eagle to higher level of care. Our FSU was placed approximately 3.2 clicks away from CCP Eagle at the bottom of a ridge line, in defilade and under dense overhead concealment. The operating area itself was on a flat surface and under a rock overhang that provided additional cover. Our FSU was manned by a general surgeon, nurse practitioner, ethnic medics, and ethnic nurses. Additionally, we would stage our QRF element here and support the FSU as needed until called upon. To the west of the ridgeline would be our vehicle cache. The vehicles serve two purposes. One would be to drive down and intercept the aid and litter teams offset from our CCPs to reduce the potential of compromising our medical locations from enemy air assets. The second purpose was to transport the stabilized casualties to the jungle hospital. The resistance had planned on utilizing a bulldozer to cut through the vegetation and make a trail for the vehicles to make it to the link-up site. As a contingency, we would establish our resupply medical bundles here at the FSU. Additionally, the Rangers on the aid and litter teams were prepared to move the casualties the entirety of the way and also hand over casualty cards to our surgical element. They were also prepared to carry the resupply bundles back up to our forward elements. This general area would also be where we would establish our patrol base prior to the operation. The night leading up to the operation, our elements would stagger out of the patrol base with all elements being established by 0530. The raid would then initiate at 0600. This image represents the layout of CCP Eagle. The site was selected because it was the only piece of terrain that offered cover, concealment, can manage multiple casualties, and was in reasonable distance of the fight. Multiple large boulders would form a trench-like T-intersection from our 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. We would designate for our priority and routine casualties. We would position our casualties sitting upright against the rock wall in order to conserve space and for rapid visual reassessments. From our 3 o'clock to our 9 o'clock would be designated for our urgent casualties. Centralized in our CCP would be our medical equipment. To the upper right would be where we would place our expectant casualties, and in the lower left, and some defilet and under topside concealment, we would place our killed in action. As a contingency of overflow of casualties, we would push all the priority and routine casualties out into the bamboo groves and designate the space between the rocks for only urgent casualties. Challenges we faced was that the layout and the workspace greatly differed from what I had experienced during the GWAT. I had no plans on how I would manage the expectant casualties and would provide little to no care for the expectant. This would lead to emotional friction with my ethnic counterparts and was later resolved. Additionally, I was never able to establish a choke point for receiving casualties into the CCP, and casualties would flow in from all angles. This led to difficulty with management and accountability within the CCP. I was, however, able to establish a choke point of casualties leaving the CCP and was able to do final reassessments and treatments as needed prior to evacuation. Within the first hour of the operation, the assault force was able to breach through the outer fence line, but was not able to breach through the inner fence line. We also began to receive scattered mortar impacts. In the first hour, CCP Eagle would receive 4 urgent, 2 priority, 4 routine, and 2 expectant casualties, all as a result from small arms fire, shrapnel from 40mm grenades, and stepping on landmines. These landmines were not detectable by metal detectors as they were primarily made with plastic. Our vehicles were not able to make it to the link-up site during this time, and I would lose all radio communications with CCP Falcon and our FSU. Before losing radio communications, I was able to relay the first 4 urgent casualties. Following traditional triage thought processes, I would also push the first 4 urgent casualties out of the CCP in hopes that they would make it to the vehicle link-up site for a rapid transport back to our FSU. They would ultimately be carried back the entire way. Shortly after pushing out the first 4 urgent casualties, I was notified that the vehicles were not going to be utilized and we would be carrying casualties the entire distance. I understood that this would take over 2 hours for our teams to carry the casualty to our FSU and an additional hour for those teams to run back up to our forward elements. With the ongoing assault and low amount of medics, I did not allocate any to provide en-route care. With these factors in mind, I would shift my triage and evacuation plan. From here on out, CCP Eagle would hold on to all urgent casualties and prioritize evacuation for the walking wounded and stable non-ambulatory patients, and phase out the expectant and deceased patients as resources allowed. At approximately an hour and 10 minutes post-initiation, a Russian jet fighter would arrive on station and conduct multiple airstrikes in vicinity of Target 1 and Target 2. Our assault force was still unable to establish a foothold. We continued to receive significant mortar fire in between the airstrikes. During this time, CCP Eagle would be holding on to 6 urgent casualties, now included those that were wounded by airstrikes and mortar blasts. This video shares the actions of our Rangers between Target 1 and CCP Eagle.
快来点！我来。
During the second hour and third hour post-initiation, the resistance would transition to conducting a phased withdrawal. Our mission then shifted to retrieving the remaining casualties. Between the outer fence line and the inner fence line was approximately 15 feet. Beyond the inner fence line was a trench line and reinforced bunker positions. 8 of our allies were stuck between the 2 fence lines, and after multiple attempts, they were unretrievable. They were also confirmed or identified as already deceased. During that time, CCP Eagle and CCP Falcon were prepared for breakdown and movement with the casualties. At approximately 3 hours after the raid initiated, both CCPs would break down and begin evacuation back to our FSU. We would continue to receive sporadic mortar fire throughout the evacuation. CCP Eagle would be moving with approximately 14 casualties that ranged from all triage criteria. As the primary medic, I would move up and down this convoy to continue reassessments and treatments throughout the movement. This video shares portions of that movement. After about 2.5 hours of movement, we were approximately 800 meters away from our FSU. That's when we received a request for support by CCP Falcon for additional hammocks and personnel to support their evacuation. The message was delivered by an ethnic ranger who stepped up to be a runner after radio communications had failed. Over the course of the operation, he would maneuver over 7 hours on foot, relaying critical information between our elements. CCP Eagle would then move approximately 1 hour to intercept with our Falcon element. We would integrate and continue our evacuation process. After 8 hours post-initiation, our team would return to the FSU. On final approach, I was mentally and physically exhausted and was expecting to hear the sweet index call. But as we broke through the wood line and into the open area, I realized that the mass casualty operation was very much ongoing as our casualties were now consolidated at the FSU. This moment gave me true appreciation for all the unknown distance and time events that I experienced during my time in the Ranger Regiment. I would take a 5-minute break and call a huddle with our team. Following the huddle, I would take over triage, treatment, pre-op, and evacuation, allowing our nurse, practitioner, and surgeon to focus on surgical care. During this time, we would receive multiple airstrikes in the corridor between the Burma Army camps and our FSU location. After taking over triage and coordinating with our nurse practitioner, we would identify 7 casualties that were candidates for receiving blood. We had no lab capabilities, and I had failed to pack outing cards, so I had to implement an unconventional means of donor screening. I would coordinate with our ethnic ranger leader to identify individuals that were O positive, and had a good reputation for good health and character to reduce the risk of transmitting bloodborne diseases. I had no way of confirming their blood type and had to solely rely on trust. We ultimately were successful in drawing 15 units of blood. One donor was unable to complete the draw. Out of the 7 casualties that received blood, we had 0 adverse reactions. On the ground, our partners witnessed as their friends visibly improved through the blood transfusions, giving us immediate buy-in on the procedure and our team's capabilities. This would be the first recorded use of blood transfusions in the field during this conflict. Cold store blood was not an option due to our lack of logistics. Multiple times, I considered conducting the blood draw in my forward CCP, but ultimately decided not to, due to the instability of the tactical situation. At no point did I consider drawing blood at the FSU and having it sent forward to my FSU. This would later be a consideration for all medical plans. Since this event, hundreds have been blood typed through the use of outing cards, and Rolo is now a self-sustained capability by our ethnic ranger medics. In regards to preparation and planning in the denied environment, had we not invested the 4 days of training, care to fire, I believe that the operation would have resulted far worse. Additionally, while in the CCP, I provide little care, and the majority of care was performed by my partners, allowing me to manage the CCP. During the planning phase, I realized how spoiled I was during the GWAT with resources that allowed for route planning and surveillance over our targets. We relied heavily on ground reconnaissance and our ethnic rangers for understanding the terrain. During our reconnaissance and planning phase, we would prioritize identifying the availability of topside concealment. All of our routes and site selections were shifted based on the availability of topside concealment to reduce the risk of compromise from drones and other enemy air surveillance platforms. Additional layers of contingency planning that we had to implement was the quantity and disbursement of our medical supplies and controlled substances. During our time in the forward CCP, I would utilize approximately 1,600 milligrams of ketamine solely for pain management of those who had tourniquets applied. Resupplies took far longer than what we expected or experienced during the GWAT. Additionally, with the unreliable radio communications, we had to have contingencies in place for our casualty handovers to ensure continuity of care. The triage and evacuation problem set that I faced was something that I had not previously trained or prepared for. The shift in decision was based solely off of my best medical judgment, understanding of resources, and understanding of the tactical environment. I now realize that triage decisions go well beyond our textbook literature of injury patterns and vital signs, and must factor in multiple layers of operational constraints in a denied environment. A constant concern is risk to force during evacuation. We're constantly considering that our evacuation platforms are compromised by enemy surveillance platforms and followed to our FSU, which would put them in danger from enemy airstrikes. Multiple times in Burma, we've had our CCPs and FSUs compromised and struck by airstrikes. In facing prolonged evacuation timelines, we face prolonged tourniquet applications. I face significant difficulty in maintaining hemostasis through means of wound packing in attempts to perform tourniquet conversions, especially in a prolonged and unmonitored setting. I believe that medics operating in a denied environment should have the ability to perform surgical intervention for true tourniquet conversions. Additionally, I failed to maintain consistent control of my CCP, which led to casualties being transported with tourniquets high and tight unnecessarily for the entire duration of the evacuation. Our longest tourniquet application time was 7 hours. In regards to building sustainable medical capabilities, this is what I found to be most impactful. I truly love the people and the cause in which they are fighting for. This love would guide my actions on and off the battlefield and was witnessed by my partners, who I now consider family. This would build significant trust between my partners and I and open the door for conversations that was guided by humility. The conversations would give me a further understanding for the people, their culture, and their background. By understanding this, it would reshape how I would lead, follow, teach, and communicate with my teams. As a foreigner and a visitor, I would bring a different capability and skill set. And as my host, they would provide information such as the terrain, resources, and the enemy's actions. Together, we would plan and develop and execute on how we can reduce battlefield mortality. Together, we built systems that allowed for training, medical planning, CCP operations, and protocols such as blood transfusions. These are just few examples of sustainable capabilities that our ethnic rangers are now leading on their own. If it is true that humans are more important than hardware, then our investment needs to be poured into humans. This investment comes in the form of training, tough, realistic training to develop our medics to become resilient problem solvers as they face unforeseen obstacles in this new environment. Education on medical best practices and pathology will guide decisions when facing operational constraints. Technology will continue to develop and is convenient for us, but also increases the threat to our personnel. A over-reliance on technology will lead to failure. If our medics are relying solely on SpO2s and end-tidal devices to conduct their patient assessments, they are set up for failure. Mastering the basics at an individual provider level is simply not enough. The impact is found when we empower our teammates and partners to also become masters of the basics. Since this event, the battle space in Burma has rapidly shifted and increased through the use of drones. Our only solution to counteract the enemy's use of drones is to produce more individuals that are capable of providing medical care in a far forward setting. We plan on conducting a 6-week training course where we would develop more medics that are not only responsible for training, providing care, but also training their comrades and the civilians on basic first aid. The biggest lesson that I've learned while serving in Burma that I'd like to share with the community is this. God is real, and He is a loving and gracious God. He calls us to free the oppressed and serve and heal the wounded. If we execute this calling out of love, He will guide and protect us in the darkest of times. I thank you for this opportunity to share with you today. I thank you all for listening. May God bless you all. Rangers lead the way.
That's it for today's podcast. Make sure to go to our website, www.prolongedfieldcare.org, Check out our free downloads and a ton of other helpful information. Grab a bag of our fresh roasted PFC coffee, links in the description below, and stay on the bleeding edge of combat and austere medicine. This is Dennis for the PFC Podcast, out.